The Park 7 training grounds weren't what the new recruits had envisioned. Instead of a desolate wasteland or a high-tech fortress, they found themselves on a temperate planet with sprawling fields and straightforward, functional training areas. The setting felt oddly ordinary given the demanding combat trials that awaited them. The recruits were a diverse group, representing various species from across the G-galaxy, each handpicked for their remarkable fighting abilities. There were towering reptilians from Kagas Prime, insectoid warriors from the hive worlds of Xylor, and bioengineered powerhouses from the high-gravity world of Deathworlder. Every species brought unique skills and strengths to the table, creating a palpable sense of competition. Among this impressive assembly, standing slightly apart, was the lone human, Private Terren, Terry Thaneel. His unremarkable physique didn't exactly project the image of an elite soldier, and many of the alien recruits shot him curious glances, unsure what to make of his presence. He lacked the imposing stature of the Kagas warriors and the intimidating exoskeletons of the Xylor. In fact, compared to his fellow recruits, Terry appeared almost delicate. The aliens' hushed conversations were far from discreet. "Is this some kind of joke?" one of the Deathworlder juggernauts rumbled to his companions, gesturing towards Terry with a booming laugh. "How does someone from a Category 4 planet even qualify for this?" A Xylor lieutenant, her mandibles clicking with amusement, chimed in, "Humans, they call themselves Deathworlders, don't they?" "How quaint." Terry registered the stares and the snickers, but remained impassive. He was accustomed to being underestimated. While the other recruits were veterans of interstellar wars, Terry's presence was due to something entirely different. Earth's designation as a death world was often met with disbelief by those from harsher environments, but they were oblivious to what the term truly signified. Their training instructor, an imposing scholar named Sergeant Grudran, stepped before the assembled recruits, his metallic skin gleaming in the sunlight. "Welcome to the Park 7 combat training grounds," he bellowed, his voice cutting through the air. "You've been chosen because you're considered the best your species has to offer. But understand this, whatever you think you know, discard it. Here, only results matter." The recruits straightened, some exchanging confident looks. They were prepared. They hailed from worlds where combat was a way of life. All except Terry, who simply adjusted his helmet, avoiding unnecessary attention. Grudran's eyes briefly settled on Terry, his ridged brow rising momentarily in curiosity. Instead of singling him out, however, he smirked and continued. "Your first session begins tomorrow. Get some rest. You'll need it." As the group dispersed to their barracks, quiet discussions about the human continued. The prevailing opinion was clear: Terry Thaneel was a laughingstock, an anomaly. Most were convinced he wouldn't survive a week in this rigorous program. Grunak, a particularly large Kagas warrior, turned to his comrades, flexing his clawed hands. "I give him 2 days before his begging to be sent back to his little blue marble of a planet." Several others chuckled in agreement. Terry paid them no mind. He'd endured this treatment before. Asterisk let them laugh asterisk, he thought. Tomorrow was a new day. The following morning, the recruits assembled on the main training field, a vast expanse enclosed by high metal walls. There were no weapons, no advanced gear, just a bare arena that appeared deceptively simple. However, the expression on Sergeant Grudran's face indicated otherwise. "Today's focus," Grudran announced, pacing before the gathered soldiers, "is basic hand-to-hand combat. If you can't defend yourselves without a weapon, you don't belong here." Most of the aliens stood relaxed, some even stifling yawns. They trained their entire lives for combat, unarmed fighting was instinctive. Terry stood among them, silent and watchful, his eyes scanning the recruits. He knew what was coming. "Pair up," Grudran commanded. The recruits quickly formed partnerships, mostly with members of their own species. No one wanted to be paired with someone perceived as weaker, especially the human. Unfortunately for Terry, it was unavoidable. His gaze met that of Grunak, the enormous Kagas warrior from the previous night. The hulking alien grinned, striding over and cracking his knuckles loud enough to echo off the walls. "Looks like I get the easy task today," Grunak sneered, towering over Terry. The Kagas was easily 2 feet taller, with biceps thicker than Terry's torso. His scaled skin shimmered in the sunlight, and his tail twitched in anticipation. Terry simply shrugged, looking up at him without a word. His lack of reaction seemed to irritate Grunnak further. Grudran's voice interrupted the tense silence. First drill, basic takedowns. Each pair will demonstrate a simple defensive maneuver. Take your opponent down using only your hands. No lethal strikes. This is training, not execution. The Xylor lieutenant was the first to demonstrate, her movements a blur of efficient precision as she locked pincers with a fellow insectoid warrior. Her swift, fluid motions were a testament to the Xylor's natural combat prowess. She immobilized her opponent in a matter of seconds, culminating in a decisive takedown that sent the other Xylor crashing to the ground. A ripple of polite applause went through the assembled recruits. One after another, the other pairs followed suit. The Deathworlder juggernauts, relying on their raw strength and dense musculature, easily overpowered one another in a display of brute force. The reptilian Kagas warriors, on the other hand, showcased a blend of power and technique, utilizing flips and throws to bring their opponents down with crushing impact. Each demonstration drew murmurs of acknowledgement, but nothing unexpected. These were seasoned warriors, after all. This was their element. Finally, it was Terry and Grunnak's turn. Grunnak, eager to make a statement, didn't hesitate. "Let's get this over with, human," he growled, stepping forward with predatory confidence. He lunged, claws extended, aiming to seize Terry by the shoulders and slam him to the ground. He was fast, but Terry was faster. With a subtle sidestep, Terry evaded Grunnak's grasp. In the blink of an eye, he shifted his weight, bringing his elbow down hard on the alien's outstretched arm. A sickening crack echoed across the training grounds. Grunnak's balance faltered, just enough for Terry to capitalize. In one fluid motion, Terry hooked his foot behind Grunnak's leg and executed a sharp twist. The Kagas warrior, accustomed to dominating opponents, found himself suddenly airborne. He landed with a resounding thud that reverberated through the arena, flat on his back, his eyes wide with stunned disbelief. The training yard fell silent. No one moved, no one spoke. The only sound was Grunnak's ragged breathing as he struggled to regain his composure. Terry, displaying no sign of triumph, simply stepped back and dusted off his hands as if the takedown had been nothing more than a minor inconvenience. "You all right, big guy?" he asked casually, extending a hand to help Grunnak up. Grunnak, his face a mask of confusion and anger, slapped Terry's hand away. He struggled to his feet, tail thrashing furiously. What did you do?" he stammered. Terry raised an eyebrow. "Basic self-defense," he replied. "We're still doing that, right?" Grunnak's fists clenched, and for a moment it seemed as if he might lash out. Before he could react, however, Sergeant Grudran stepped between them, his metallic eyes fixed on Terry. "Private O'Neill," Grudran said slowly, a hint of surprise in his voice, "care to explain what just transpired?" Terry shrugged, maintaining his composure. "Just used his momentum against him, sir." "Leverage." Grudran stared at Terry, then turned to the other recruits, who were watching the human with newfound wariness. The earlier smirks and whispers had vanished, replaced by quiet murmurs of confusion. "Leverage," Grudran repeated, his voice low. He glanced back at Grunnak, who was still fuming but refrained from further aggression. "Get back in line," he ordered, his tone brooking no argument. Grunnak shot Terry one last venomous glare before stomping back to his position, muttering under his breath. Terry returned to his spot, his expression unreadable. He felt the weight of their stares, the same routine he had experienced countless times before, first laughter, then doubt, then fear. As the other recruits resumed their training, the mood had shifted. The Xylor lieutenant no longer appeared amused, and the Deathworlder juggernauts, once so confident in their superiority, were whispering amongst themselves, their gazes frequently returning to Terry. The training continued, but the atmosphere had palpably shifted. Sergeant Grudran pushed the recruits harder, introducing increasingly complex combat scenarios. He seemed particularly interested in observing Terry, often pitting him against larger, stronger opponents, or setting up uneven matches that forced the human to rely on his wits and agility rather than brute strength. The aliens, initially dismissive, now watched Terry with a mixture of grudging respect and unease. They had learned their lesson about underestimating the human, and while some still harbored resentment, none dared to challenge him openly. The afternoon session brought a new twist. Grudran announced a change in the training regimen. "I think it's time we step things up," he declared, his metallic eyes gleaming. "Now that you've all warmed up, let's see how you handle some real combat simulations." The recruit straightened, eager to shake off the lingering awkwardness from the morning's events. "Pair up with a different species," Grudran instructed. "You will demonstrate a basic self-defense technique under pressure. No weapons, no advanced tech. Just your wits and your physical abilities." A wave of anticipation rippled through the assembled recruits. This was more like it, a true test of their skills. Most of the recruits quickly partnered up, though there was a noticeable hesitation when it came to pairing with Terry. After witnessing his takedown of Grunnak, no one wanted to be on the receiving end of his unusual fighting style. Grudran surveyed the training ground, his gaze settling on Terry. "Private O'Neill," he called out, a faint smirk playing on his lips, "since you're so adept at using leverage, let's see how you handle something a bit more aggressive." From the far side of the training ground, a Deathworlder juggernaut named Gorak lumbered forward. He was even larger than Grunnak, his muscle-bound form resembling a walking tank. His thick, grey skin looked more like armor plating than flesh, a testament to his species' adaptation to the high gravity of their home world. Gorak's imposing size cast a long shadow over Terry as he approached, and the other recruits exchanged nervous glances. Some were eager to witness a bit of payback for Grunnak, while others were simply curious to see what would happen. Gorak crossed his massive arms, his deep chest rising and falling with slow, deliberate breaths. "So, the little human wants to play again," he rumbled, his voice deep and gravelly. There was no mockery in his tone, only the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to crushing opponents. Terry didn't flinch. He met Gorak's gaze and gave a slight nod, the same unreadable expression on his face. "Let's get this over with then," he replied calmly, rolling his shoulders as if preparing for nothing more than a light workout. Grudran stepped back, giving the two ample space. "All right," he barked, addressing the entire group. "The scenario is straightforward. Gorak will attack with full force. Your task, O'Neill, is to defend yourself and demonstrate a basic technique to neutralize the threat. No dirty tricks, no lethal blows. Just pure self-defense. Understood?" Gorak cracked his neck, preparing to charge. "I'll make this quick," he rumbled, lowering himself into a stance that made him look even more like a boulder poised to roll downhill. Terry simply nodded. "I appreciate that." There was a brief moment of stillness, a pregnant pause before the inevitable clash. Then, with a guttural roar, Gorak exploded into motion. For such a massive being, he moved with surprising speed, his legs churning like pistons as he charged towards Terry. The ground trembled with each step, but Terry remained impassive. He waited, his body loose, his eyes fixed on the approaching juggernaut. To an untrained observer, it might have seemed as if Terry was about to be flattened. But Terry was anything but untrained. He had faced far worse. As Gorak's enormous fist swung towards him, aiming to crush him like an insect, Terry ducked low at the last possible second. The juggernaut's momentum carried him forward, his punch whistling harmlessly through the air where Terry's head had been moments before. Terry was already moving, slipping around to Gorak's side with a speed that belied his unassuming physique. Then, in one fluid motion, Terry struck. He didn't attempt to overpower Gorak with brute force, there was no point. Instead, with precision born of years of training, his hands found a pressure point just below Gorak's shoulder. Before the giant alien could react, Terry twisted and used the juggernaut's own momentum to throw him off balance. Gorak's immense form tilted precariously for a heartbeat, a look of utter bewilderment twisting his features as he grappled with the sudden loss of control. Then, with a ground-shaking crash that sent tremors through the training yard, the Deathworlder giant slammed onto the ground, raising a cloud of dust. The impact was so forceful that even those watching from a distance winced. Terry, unruffled, took a step back, casually brushing off his hands as if he'd just swatted a bothersome fly. Self-defense, he commented mildly, as if that single word explained the improbable feat he'd just accomplished. The other recruits, frozen in place, stared in open-mouthed astonishment. Gorak, one of the most physically imposing and formidable beings among them, had been brought down in a matter of seconds by a human who barely seemed winded. Sergeant Grudran's metallic eyes narrowed, a flicker of disbelief crossing his usually impassive face. He'd witnessed countless combat demonstrations in his long career, but this was something entirely different. His polished skin shimmered as he approached the scene. "Gorak," he snapped, his voice sharp despite the undercurrent of surprise, "get up." Gorak, still dazed and disoriented, slowly pushed himself up, blinking in stunned silence. He looked down at Terry, his expression a strange mix of confusion and grudging admiration. "How?" he mumbled, still struggling to comprehend what had just transpired. Terry, maintaining his nonchalant demeanor, simply replied, "Leverage." A few nervous chuckles rippled through the ranks of the onlookers, the strained laughter of those who weren't quite sure how to react. This time, however, the laughter wasn't directed at Terry. A dawning realization was spreading among the recruits: the human wasn't some fluke, a lucky underdog. He was dangerous star. Grudran glanced from Gorak to Terry, his mind racing. "That wasn't exactly standard procedure," he remarked slowly, striving to maintain his composure, "but effective." "Very effective." The recruits murmured amongst themselves. The Xylor lieutenant's mandibles clicked rapidly, a clear sign of her unease. Even Grunak, still smarting from his own earlier humiliation, had to concede that something about this human was off star. There was no way a being so small should be capable of overpowering someone like Gorak. And yet, he had. It hadn't even seemed like a struggle. Grudran clapped his hands together, regaining control of the situation. "All right, recruits," he barked, "pair up again. Let's see if anyone else can manage a basic defense as efficiently as Private Anil." As the others hesitantly resumed their drills, their eyes kept returning to Terry. The human didn't seem to notice, or perhaps he simply didn't care. Either way, the message was clear: the dynamic had shifted. From that point on, no one in the training yard would ever underestimate a human again. Terry stood off to the side, stretching his arms, a small, almost imperceptible smile playing at the corner of his lips. This was just the beginning. The tension in the training grounds was thick enough to cut with a knife. The initial lightheartedness of the combat drills had evaporated, replaced by a heavy sense of unease. Terry Anil, the unassuming human from a supposedly inferior planet, had single-handedly overturned the established hierarchy, and the other recruits couldn't shake their awareness of him, even as they attempted to concentrate on their own exercises. Sergeant Grudran, pacing before the group, moved with a newly acquired intensity. He wasn't just overseeing a training session anymore, he was witnessing something extraordinary unfold, something that defied his understanding of human capabilities. Humans were known for their adaptability, yes, but this was on an entirely different level. Grunak, the Kagas warrior, still nursing his wounded pride and the lingering sting of humiliation after Gorak's defeat, stomped over to a cluster of recruits. His voice, normally booming with confidence, was now subdued, his gaze darting towards Terry as if trying to decipher a puzzle. "This isn't right," he grumbled. "I've fought Deathworlders before. They don't do that." Nearby, the Xylor lieutenant, Tevik, clicked her mandibles nervously, her iridescent exoskeleton shimmering as she shifted her weight from one spindly leg to another. "Perhaps he's been enhanced," she suggested, her voice laced with uncertainty. Grunak scoffed. "Enhanced? He's a human star. They don't possess the technology for that level of augmentation." Tevik glanced towards Terry, who was quietly observing the next pair of recruits demonstrate their defensive maneuvers. Then how she began, but Grunak cut her off with a frustrated wave of his clawed hand. "I don't know," he growled, "but I don't like it." The Kagas and Xylor weren't the only ones feeling unnerved. Whispers spread through the training yard like wildfire. The Deathworlder juggernauts, usually so assured of their physical dominance, had fallen silent, their faces creased with bewilderment. Gorak, still rubbing his shoulder where Terry had applied the decisive pressure point, remained unusually quiet, staring at the human with a mixture of awe and resentment. For the first time since their arrival on Park 7, the recruits' focus wasn't on proving the superiority of their own species. All eyes were on the human, and a creeping sense of apprehension was beginning to take hold. Sergeant Grudran, noticing the shift in the atmosphere, let his sharp gaze sweep across the training yard, picking up on the waves of unease emanating from the recruits. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. He'd seen recruits exceed expectations before, but Terry wasn't just exceeding them, he was shattering them, rewriting the rules of engagement. The recruits' unease continued to simmer beneath the surface. Grudran's unexpected command to have Terry fight alone against groups of 3 had thrown them off balance. It was a drastic change of pace, a sudden escalation that no one had anticipated. Whispers and hushed conversations rippled through the assembled aliens. Some were openly skeptical, convinced that even the human couldn't overcome such a disadvantage. Others were more cautious, remembering the lessons learned earlier in the week about underestimating Terry O'Neill. They had witnessed firsthand what he was capable of, and the prospect of facing him in a multi-species combat scenario was unsettling, to say the least. Grunak, however, was practically radiating smug satisfaction. The opportunity for payback, for reclaiming his lost pride, was too good to pass up. He relished the idea of finally getting his claws on the human and showing everyone what a real warrior could do. He exchanged confident glances with Gorak, the Deathworlder juggernaut, and Shik, a Xylor drone known for her lightning-fast reflexes. Their team was a formidable combination of brute force, resilience, and speed, a perfect counter, they believed, to Terry's unorthodox fighting style. They saw it as a surefire path to victory. As the first match began, the tension in the training yard thickened. Terry stood alone in the center of the arena, facing the combined might of Grunak, Gorak, and Shik. He appeared calm, almost serene, despite the daunting odds. His expression was unreadable, his eyes scanning the movements of his opponents, assessing their strengths and weaknesses, calculating his next move. He knew this wouldn't be easy, but he was ready. He had trained for this, prepared for the unexpected, honed his skills to a razor's edge. He wouldn't back down. He couldn't. Grudran's signal to begin echoed through the arena, and the 3 aliens surged forward, a coordinated assault designed to overwhelm Terry with sheer power and speed. Grunak, fueled by vengeance, roared as he charged, his massive fists aimed at crushing the human. Gorak, a living wall of muscle, lumbered forward, intent on trapping Terry in a pincer movement. Shik, a blur of insectoid limbs, darted around the perimeter, seeking an opening to strike. It was a chaotic, brutal onslaught, a display of raw power and aggression that would have intimidated any ordinary soldier. But Terry was anything but ordinary. He moved with a fluid grace that belied his unassuming physique, dodging Grunak's initial attack, slipping past Gorak's attempted grapple, and anticipating Shik's lightning-fast strikes. He used their momentum against them, their size and strength becoming liabilities as he redirected their attacks, turning their aggression into their downfall. He was a whirlwind of controlled motion, a force of nature in the midst of the storm. With a swift, calculated strike, Terry brought Grunak's charge to a halt, sending the hulking Kagas warrior stumbling. He then used Gorak's own weight against him, leveraging the Juggernaut's momentum to throw him off balance. Finally, he anticipated Shik's attack, catching the Xylor drone mid-strike and sending her sprawling to the ground. In a matter of seconds, he had neutralized the combined threat of 3 formidable opponents, leaving them disoriented and struggling to regain their footing. The other recruits watched in stunned silence, their earlier confidence replaced by a growing sense of disbelief. Terry didn't pause to celebrate his victory. He knew this was just the beginning. He remained alert, his eyes scanning the arena, anticipating the next challenge. He was ready for whatever Grudran threw at him, prepared to push himself to the limit, to prove what a human could do. The tension in the training yard was palpable, the air thick with anticipation. The recruits had learned their lesson about underestimating Terry O'Neill. They knew now that he was a force to be reckoned with, a warrior who defied expectations, a human who could hold his own against the best the galaxy had to offer. The hush that fell over the training grounds was almost as shocking as Terry's display of skill. 3 formidable warriors, each a champion of their respective species, lay scattered across the arena, defeated by a single human. Grudran, his metallic face unreadable, surveyed the scene. The other recruits watched, a mixture of awe and apprehension swirling in their eyes. No one had expected this outcome. The sheer audacity of Terry's solitary stand against a multi-species team had initially been met with disbelief, even ridicule. Now, the silence was a testament to the undeniable reality of his prowess. He hadn't just won, he had dominated. Terry, breathing steadily, stood amidst the fallen aliens. He offered a hand to Grunnak, who, despite his bruised pride, accepted it with a grunt of grudging respect. Goruk, still winded from his unceremonious landing, pushed himself up, his gaze fixed on Terry. There was no longer any animosity in his eyes, only a quiet acknowledgement of the human's extraordinary abilities. Even Shik, the agile Xylor drone, chirped a sound that, according to the universal translator, conveyed a sentiment akin to admiration. The initial hostility and skepticism had evaporated, replaced by a newfound respect, bordering on reverence. Grudran cleared his throat, breaking the spellbound silence. "Well," he began, his voice tinged with a hint of amusement, "that was unexpected." He turned his gaze to the other recruits, who were still absorbing the implications of what they had just witnessed. "Any of you still think a human is an easy target?" he asked, a challenging glint in his metallic eyes. The recruits remained silent, their expressions a mixture of humility and newfound understanding. The lesson had been delivered, and it had been received loud and clear. Terry O'Neill had proven that strength wasn't measured in size or brute force, but in skill, strategy, and an unwavering determination to survive. Private O'Neill, Grudran addressed Terry directly, a flicker of genuine approval in his gaze. "You've exceeded all expectations. Your performance has been remarkable." He paused, considering his words carefully. "It seems Earth's reputation as a death world might be more accurate than we initially assumed." Terry offered a slight nod, acknowledging the compliment without a trace of arrogance. He knew this was just one battle won, a small step in a much larger journey. He had proven his worth, not just to himself, but to the entire galaxy. He had earned their respect, not through boasting or intimidation, but through quiet competence and unwavering resolve. The final training session continued, but the dynamic had irrevocably shifted. The recruits, humbled by Terry's performance, approached the remaining drills with a renewed sense of purpose. They no longer focused on proving their individual superiority, but on learning from each other, recognizing the value of diverse skills and perspectives. The initial interspecies rivalry had faded, replaced by a nascent sense of camaraderie, a shared understanding of the challenges that lay ahead. They were a team now, forged in the crucible of combat training, united by a common goal. Grudran, observing the change in his recruits, allowed himself a rare smile. He had witnessed firsthand the transformative power of Terry's influence, the way a single individual could inspire others to reach beyond their perceived limitations. He had created a true team, a cohesive unit capable of facing any challenge, any threat, with courage and determination. And at the heart of this transformation stood a human, a seemingly ordinary soldier from a planet often dismissed as insignificant. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the training grounds, Grudran called the recruits to attention one last time. "You have all proven yourselves worthy of the Park 7 program," he announced, his voice filled with pride. "You have learned valuable lessons, not just about combat, but about teamwork, resilience, and the importance of never underestimating your opponent." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the assembled recruits. "But one among you has demonstrated something truly exceptional." He turned to Terry, his metallic face reflecting the dying rays of the sun. "Private O'Neill," he said, his voice ringing with authority, "you have shown us the true meaning of a Deathworlder. You have earned our respect, and you have earned your place among the elite." The training yard fell utterly silent. Dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight that pierced the high metallic walls, illuminating the 3 prone figures of Grunnak, Goruk, and Shik. Each alien, a formidable warrior in their own right, lay defeated by the lone human who stood amidst them, breathing steadily, not even breaking a sweat. Terry simply surveyed the scene, his expression unreadable, as if taking down 3 opponents simultaneously was nothing out of the ordinary. The other recruits, perched on the edges of the arena, watched with a mixture of awe and dawning comprehension. The whispers, the doubts, the outright mockery, all of it had vanished, replaced by a stunned silence that spoke volumes. Grudran, his metallic face reflecting the sunlight, stepped forward, his usual impassive demeanor cracked by a flicker of genuine surprise. "Well, then," he began, his voice a low rumble, "that certainly settles that." He glanced at the downed aliens, then back at Terry, a hint of amusement creeping into his voice. "I believe we have our answer. Private O'Neill, it appears you have a certain aptitude for this." Terry offered a small, almost imperceptible nod, acknowledging the praise without a trace of arrogance. He knew this wasn't about showing off or proving a point. It was about survival. It was about demonstrating the resilience and adaptability that defined a Deathworlder. The remaining recruits exchanged glances, a newfound understanding dawning in their eyes. They had witnessed firsthand the effectiveness of Terry's unconventional fighting style, the way he used his opponent's strength against them, turning their size and aggression into liabilities. They had learned a valuable lesson about the nature of true strength, and it had nothing to do with brute force or advanced weaponry. Grudran gestured towards the fallen aliens. "Get them to the med bay," he instructed a nearby group of aides, "and then report back for debriefing. We have much to discuss." As the aides moved to assist the injured warriors, Grudran turned his attention back to Terry. "Private O'Neill," he said, his voice carrying a newfound respect, "a word, if you please." Terry followed the Scholar Sergeant away from the arena, leaving the other recruits to ponder the implications of what they had just witnessed. The training was over, but the lessons learned would stay with them long after they left Park 7. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, as Terry and Grudran stood on a small observation deck overlooking the training grounds. The cool evening air carried a faint metallic tang, a familiar scent to anyone who had spent time on a Scholar world. Grudran turned to Terry, his metallic face reflecting the fading light. "Private O'Neill," he began, his voice softer than usual, "I've been observing you closely throughout this training program. Your methods are unorthodox, to say the least. But effective. Remarkably so." Terry remained silent, waiting for the Scholar Sergeant to continue. He knew Grudran hadn't called him aside for mere pleasantries. There was something more to this. "Your planet," Grudran continued, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon, Earth. "It's different. We classify it as a death world, a designation often met with skepticism by those from harsher environments. But I'm beginning to understand what that truly signifies. It's not just about the dangers, the predators, the constant struggle for survival. It's about the resilience it breeds, the adaptability it demands." Terry nodded slowly, acknowledging the Scholar's words. He had lived that reality every day of his life. It was ingrained in his very being. Grudran turned to face Terry directly, his metallic eyes gleaming in the twilight. "Private O'Neill," he said, his voice carrying a weight of unspoken understanding, "you possess a unique set of skills honed in the crucible of your world. Skills that are invaluable in the galaxy as it is today." He paused, his gaze intense. "I have a proposition for you." The words hung in the air, heavy with anticipation. Terry met Grudran's gaze, waiting for the Scholar to reveal his offer. He had a feeling this was about more than just completing the Park 7 program. This was about something bigger, something that could change the course of his life, perhaps even the fate of the galaxy itself.